Welcome to my channel, GM Sprinkles here. I wanted to create this channel to create dialogue and share my thoughts on tabletop role-playing games. Before we get into the topic of why I left D&D, I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. Firstly, I wanted to clarify that when I say D&D, I'm talking about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I won't be talking about the other editions, or I won't be talking about Pathfinder, just purely and simply, I haven't played them. Secondly, I wanted to say that I don't hate D&D. I think it's a great system. It's fun to play. It's great. I'm going to play in the future. But I just want to bring up some of their flaws, of course. But there is a reason why it is number one, and it is at the top of the market. So, my background is that I'm an aspiring writer, and I have created 2 campaigns, and I love all things nerdy. I started playing D&D 5 years ago, and most of that time I was a dungeon master, or a game master, whatever you want to call it. I started playing D&D Adventurers League first at this local store, and that's how I got into this hobby. I went there with a couple of friends, and the idea was basically learn the game, get our friend to run, and run at home so we didn't have to go into the store and pay for table hire, etc. However, what happened after 5 games and starting to learn the rules, my dungeon master gave me a module, said to go home, read it, and run a game in 2 weeks. I went home, I read it thoroughly, maybe a bit too thoroughly, and ran a game. Everyone seemed to enjoy it at the table, and I realized how much I actually love running. So this is where this comes from and why I love doing it. Not long after that, I began running a lot of games at Adventurers League, and I got a lot of helpful feedback that helped me grow as a DM, and I had a lot of full tables as I was starting to run more and more. The more and more I ran, I began to stretch the rules and put my own spin on all the adventures in the books that are given there. And before I knew it, I decided I wanted to create my own campaign. After creating my first campaign, I did learn a lot and did help me create my second one, which is a lot better than my first. And it's something I really enjoy, and I will be definitely creating more in the future. So my experience with tabletop role-playing games is very limited, so I'm definitely no expert in the matter. However, I have played a couple of games of the Dragon Age role-playing game. I have also played a couple of games of Call of Cthulhu. There may be a third game by the time this video comes out. And I have also started playing the Cyber System, which I've been playing all this year, which I really enjoy. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, I have 5 years playing D&D. Okay, onto the topic of why I left D&D. So D&D, the rules as written, put a lot of emphasis going through combat and getting experience from doing combat encounters. The problem with this that I find is it creates murder hobos. A murder hobo is someone who goes through the game fighting, killing monsters, and doesn't engage in anything else more deeply than that. Which, if that's how you like to play D&D, that's fine by me. However, personally, if I want to just go kill monsters and do that, I'll play a video game, something like Dark Souls or something. Another issue I have with the XP system is that it gets complicated with adding up XP, I find. It's not really a big issue, it's just something that I thought was worth mentioning. Basically, you get XP, so from level 1 to get to level 2, I think it's 300, and then it's 900, then I think it's 1800, and then 3200. And that's just off the top of my head. And if that's wrong, that proves my point that it's really hard to remember off the top of my head. Obviously, to get around this issue, you can just use the milestone XP, and this is what I do when I run D&D. I just use the milestone, which means you get experience from progressing through the story. So once you get to a certain point, you just level up, and I find that a lot easier than adding up experience. But I just thought it was worth mentioning both ways. And this does actually lead on to my next point, that there's a lot of maths in D&D. Now, that may not be an issue for some, but for me, when I have to stop the game to add up all the dice or add up all the modifiers, it can really slow down the game. Or if the players have to do it, I find that quite often some of my players who aren't quite good at maths, they do take a little while to add up all the dice, and that really can slow down combat. So that is a bit of a problem. I know you can use a calculator and all that, but it does get a little bit ridiculous, especially at high level D&D. For example, the other day I was running a game and my players were about level 10, and some of the enemies were throwing out attacks that were doing 20d6 damage, which just meant that even if I was adding that up with a calculator or whatever, that really does slow down the game. Because what I always have to do is just pass the dice off to the player next to me and ask them to add that up, and then I would add the modifiers again after all those dice. But even that still kind of slowed down the flow of game. And I feel like that can be an issue, especially that combat is already really drawn out. Actually, that's another point. Combat really gets drawn out in D&D. I find that, especially boss encounters, I feel like they take up the whole session sometimes, or even half a session, and that's really a downside in my opinion. I know combat is important, and I do agree combat is very important. But just because it takes a long time doesn't mean that's the only way for it to be deadly. You can have a deadly encounter be really over really quickly, but still extremely deadly. And I feel like this may be the case that everything has so many hit points in Dungeons and Dragons, or a high armor class, and that's the problem here. Where other systems I've tried since D&D, they have a lot less hit points, and they may still have a high armor class, so it's really hard to hit, but things are just overdone real quickly. So in Call of Cthulhu, for example, is it's run or die. The combat is very deadly, and if you come from D&D, like myself, you will die. I died many times, but it's a part of the experience. And just to wrap up the combat section of this video, I would like to also mention the CR system in D&D is very confusing for me personally. Now, if that doesn't confuse you and you know how to use the CR system to create balanced encounters, please let me know in the comment section. This is something I struggle with. And the only way I've been able to make balanced encounters is behind the DM screen is change stats or armor class or health as the players go. So, for example, if the players are absolutely trouncing my villain, I will just up the hit points or up the attacks halfway through the battle, or pull out a new attack that something else might have the next CR up. But yeah, I really find the CR system is very confusing. It doesn't work very well because 2 CR5 creatures can be completely 2 different difficulties, in my opinion. But if you have a great way to deal with that, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to know. Another thing, and this is probably my least favorite thing about D&D, is racial ability bonuses. Now, this may sound weird, but I absolutely hate this. And I don't like using the word hate, but I hate the ability bonus system. And the reason is for this is because it pressures players to pick a race that will help their class and will synergize together, which I feel is so odd and stupid because this is fantasy. We're meant to be having fun. We can do whatever we want. Why should there be that pressure there? And I know the rules don't pressure that for sure. They don't say that this is what you have to do. But I know, as doing a lot of Adventure League and DMing for a lot of new players, is I see veteran DMs all the time, or veteran players even say, "Oh, you don't want to do a Dragonborn Rogue because they don't synergize well." But why? Like, why can't a new player play a Dragonborn Rogue or play an Orc Wizard? Like that, they're fun. That's a fun idea. It's great. Everyone's gonna expect them to be stupid, and it goes against that. And races have variance, and that should be okay. Volo's Guide to Monsters does this awfully as well with kobolds and full orcs. So the full orcs has a -2 intelligence, which I think is just rude. And I believe as well in Eberron, I think orcs don't have -2, which is odd that 2 different universes have different orcs. And kobolds have -2 in their strength. What if you wanted to be a strength kobold? That's like awesome. Go on you. And I know some people are going to say it's because they're small, but what about gnomes? They are just as small, a little bit bigger, I know, but they don't have a negative to the strength. So why should kobolds? Yes, they should definitely maybe have a disadvantage if they're using a 2-handed weapon, because if there's a kobold wielding a great sword, it's probably going to be bigger than them, which is going to be very hard to use. But I don't think negatives is a good thing. I think it really is silly, and then it makes you the opinion, why would I play a full orc, which sounds pretty badass to be honest, when I play a half orc, which gives me way better stats? And I think that's the thing, and I think there's a lot of focus on stats in D&D, and I'm not sure if that comes from the rules or whether that's just the players surrounding it, but there does seem to be a lot of focus on having the best stats. At the end of the day, this is a role-playing game that the aim is to have fun. So we can be whatever we want to be. We shouldn't be forced to do anything. And veteran players, if you're trying to tell your players that they can't be a certain race and certain class together because they don't synergize, don't. Because at the end of the day, we should be able to have that. And honestly, I am so sick of seeing Tabaxi rogues, Drow rogues, High Elf wizards, and Wood Elf druids. I see them all the time. And if a player wants to play a Tabaxi barbarian or a Wood Elf barbarian or an Orc wizard, that sounds way more interesting and way more refreshing than seeing the same class and race combinations that I see all the time. This next point is more as a player, but I feel like gaps between levels, there is a big difference there. And what I mean by that is a level 5 compared to a level 2, there's a huge gap there, and level 2 is not going to feel very competent compared to level 5. Even 1 and 2, or 2 and 3, even one level difference can make you feel a little bit more incompetent than the other players. And this is something that didn't really ever bother me in D&D. It just felt like level was very important. You got to level up and just to make that distinction. So if you do meet a high level wizard, it's like, wow, they are like a god compared to me. That's definitely fun, and there's definitely a game for that. But I have noticed in other systems, leveling up isn't as important, and the difference between 2 and 3, or even 1 and 6, there can be very little difference. And I know, for example, in my Cypher game, I have a tier 1 and a tier 4. So there's 3 levels between them, or 3 tiers in this case. And the tier 1 doesn't feel like they're any worse than the tier 4. Sure, the tier 4 has more abilities up their sleeve, but hit points wise, there's less hit point difference, there's less combat difference, and at level 1 you feel very confident. Same with Cthulhu actually as well. I've recently leveled up, and it just means you're slightly better at skills, where if you get lucky on the first roll, you may be still better at some skills than another player who's a level or 2 above you. Level gap is pretty easy to fix if you just give all the players the same experience, and especially if you're using the milestone XP system, then players are going to be there for the big moments and they're going to get the same XP anyway. But this still can have a bit of an issue, is what happens when a character dies. If you have a character death at the table, do you make them start level 1? Do you make them come back at the same level? Now this is a completely different topic and different thing to handle for sure, but this is where things can get tricky, because if you make them start level 1, that can really dampen the fun of the game. To be all the way up, especially if you're at high level, starting all the way at level 1, you feel incompetent, you feel like weak compared to the rest of the party, and it's like, why do these people drag me along to these dangerous battles when I'm absolutely fragile? Or if you make them start at level 15, how does that impact the story? All of a sudden you have this level 15 character come in, or level 10, whatever level you're on, which may be fine for your setting, but I know I've run settings where high level wizards and high level warriors are really hard to come by. And if that's the case, if one just happens to pop in and wants to join the party, it can really feel disconnected from the story, and that can be a problem. I don't really know the answer to what to do with a player death in D&D, but I mean, it depends on the setting, and I've found that if you make them start a few levels lower, that seems to work all right. But I'd love to know what you guys do with that. Like, do you make them start level 1? Do they just carry on at the same level, same thing, same equipment? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear that as well. Now, this next point isn't really an issue with the system. It's just my preference, and that's the magic system. I feel like it's very uniformed, and personally, I really like to think magic is free, wild, barely controllable, and that's something that I really like about other systems. The Dragon Age system and the Cypher system does this really well. Where I feel like you have 2 wizards in D&D, or even a wizard and a sorcerer, and a lot of crossover in spells. This means there's going to be a lot of the same spells and the same magic across classes, which is not what I like. But I do know a lot of people love the uniformed magic system of D&D, and I know a lot of people would try in these other systems that don't have a uniform magic trying to introduce one. But like I said, I like magic to be free, it's wild, it's barely controllable. I like to have 2 different wizards or mages, or whatever they're called in the setting, to be completely different and have different focuses, and I think that's a lot more fun than having the same crossover. An example of this is you'll see that a sorcerer and a wizard will usually both have fireball, because it's such a great spell. There's a lot of crossover in spells, so those really great spells, and they'll both have them. Now, the last topic is kind of a silly one and a minor one, but I just wanted to bring it up anyway. As an Australian, I have no idea what a foot is, and that everything's in feet kind of bothers me. I know some of the other systems, they both have feet and meters, which Cypher does, which I really like. And I know now there's a alternative edition of Cthulhu that is no longer in yards. It is in meters, which I'm going to get my hands on eventually, which I really appreciate, because I can't visualize a foot. So just keep in mind that I'm a storyteller at heart, and that's what I'm all about, is the story and the character interactions and the character development, and that's what I like. So obviously combat always takes a back seat in my games personally, and I know if that's what you're all about, combat, that's totally fine, and I get that, and D&D does combat very well, and I think it's one of the greatest things about the system. But as I am not all about the combat, because if I want combat, I'll play Dark Souls or something else personally, but that's my opinion. So at the end of the day, D&D is a great system. It does tactical combat really well, has other great advantages in the system there, and it can pretty much do anything with enough rule changes. So there is a reason why it is number 1, and it's a great system, and I'm still going to play it. And if you ask me, would I recommend it? Of course, I'm definitely going to recommend D&D. Please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments of any feedback that I could do better in the videos, or any other future topics you'd like me to cover. Thank you for watching. Enjoy your day.